Welcome to the American Diversity Report podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Levine, Editor-in-Chief of the American Diversity Report. And with me today is Dr. Joseph Nwoye, an educator and inclusion specialist who will talk to us about thought formation and transformation. As president of Diversity Frontier, he focuses on unconscious bias, diversity policies, and practice. He is the author of 2 books and more than 50 articles which share tools from his experience tackling social issues such as achievement gaps, race, and gender. He served as the Director of Multicultural Education at Illinois State University and as Chief Investigator on discriminatory issues. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's nice to be connected with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing about your visionary theories and how we can transform our thinking process. But first, let's hear from you a little bit about your work, your career that has led to this visionary work of yours.
Sure. Well, I came from Nigeria and I went to school in Pennsylvania. I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where I met incredible people, specifically people like Dr. Larry Vold and his wife, Edwina Vold. Larry happened to be a white man and Edwina happened to be a black lady. And these were perhaps the greatest people I've seen. And I learned to know more about the culture, about connecting with people, about the power of meaningful engagement with people, especially people who are different from you, because we learn the most from those who are different from us. And as a result of my connection with them, I joined Larry Vold in his program on cultural programs, specifically in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And the most important part of the program was that he brought people from urban area, people, some of whom were not fully prepared for college environment or college academic work. However, he provided opportunity for them to learn in order to be able to sustain the pressure of academic work. As I did that, I became his graduate assistant, and in course of doing that, he developed programs in various parts of the world, including Europe, specifically Britain, France, and started doing some in Nigeria and some other African countries. He epitomizes what I strive to achieve. In Philadelphia, he went further to preparing teachers, because as we can see, looking at reports that are coming from all angles, that there are teachers who, when they go to school, they see certain students as not being able to perform without even knowing about those students. And therefore, there are certain unconscious things happening, like punishing some students, especially those who are brown and colored people, for transgressions that their white counterparts don't even get reprimands, according to the reports. And the report could be seen by the work of Rowe, who writes for Settle Times, and so many other, research institutions are articulating the same thing, even in Washington, D.C. here. But my experience with Larry Vold propelled me to really commit to diversity and inclusion. I developed the habit of connecting with people whom I didn't know. And sometimes I act as if I'm crazy, but it really was joyful for me to connect with people whom I didn't know at all, because they were the one that taught me the most. So when I went to West Liberty State University to teach there, I taught courses in psychology, taught foundations of education, and so many others. I replicated the cultural program we did, which was to take students who were culturally unfamiliar with urban environment and put them to stay within that community. They live within the community. They were housed at in Pennsylvania, where at LaSalle University to be specific. And every morning they will go to schools and work with teachers. In the evening time, they will be debriefed. Initially, when they came back, they were saying, "Oh, why are these kids like this? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that?" Within a very short time period, those kids that they made some disparaging comments about became their kids. And these teachers are considered to be model teachers. And quite frankly, if I were to be responsible for making teachers, I would make sure that anyone who goes to teach should have such experience, because we live in a society where, whether we believe it or not, there are something I call artificial walls dividing people for no good reason. And people on both sides make some conclusion, or they have this perception of others which are not consistent with who they are. And I believe that the reason why it's so is that there's no connection. Some people don't even talk to one another. Even some people who live as neighbors don't know one another. And I believe that with genuine engagement, these people would be able to learn more. Otherwise, the misconception they had been taught, they believe in, you can't blame them for that. That's like social cultural environment that groomed them. That's whom they are. And we know of educational psychology, we know about schema theory, building blocks of knowledge. And these are people who have experienced a particular environment where they are nurtured. So everyone's experience has to be contextually based if we really want to know. So the exposure to new environment enabled them to see others who they had been maybe not necessarily taught, but they developed the perception that they are something they are not, because they never had opportunity to meet with them. And that program I replicated in West Liberty State College, and it was one of the best things that I am so pleased that I did, because some of my students, though they came from rural area, but they understood urban environment and they're teaching successfully in these urban areas. So when we talk about achievement gaps, we know where achievement gaps are coming. If you have students who are unprepared for college work and you put them in a high-level course, I think the result should be predictable for any reasonable human being. So these students learn those things. As a result, they're able to meet students where they are and help them to move forward. And by and large, it has been very helpful. And I wrote the program there. I also wrote the first multicultural education course. I wrote that course for West Liberty College. And then from there, I went to Illinois State, where I replicated the same thing again. I was even sending students from Illinois to Philadelphia when we didn't have enough people to move it forward. And so I also served as director of Urban Multicultural Education Center, where we had resources to help people learn. In those contests, we had people from all over the world, and there was really engagement. In fact, I organized the first student multicultural education conference in that school's history, a program that continued until I left that institution. And on coming to Washington area as a result of family issues, I worked on faculty development. See, what I've found over my research is that people are by nature good. There are people who may have PhDs, but they have never been introduced to environments other than what they had thought of those environments. So I modeled Geneva Gay's work, cultural responsive teaching. That process, I broadened it to include cultural responsive teaching for faculty, cultural responsive teaching for administrators, cultural responsive teaching for staff. And that was powerful, and that program continues up to date. And some schools within the area are replicating some of those things that I had done. So that's essentially what drives me. And I believe that we could make this world a better place by regarding everybody, helping everybody, that especially those who need the help. And essentially, that's what drives my work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all that you've done, and I'm sure that our audience does too. I bet they'd like to hear a little bit more about what that curriculum looks like that you created for staff and administrators to do this. Can you share that a little bit?
Sure. Well, there are three parts to it. The one for faculty members were essentially designed to help teachers, especially those who have not been exposed to cultural environment, what the schools are like, what children have to go through, like going through drugs and going through family that don't have job or have economic support to support these kids. Schools that are, you see schools that are not really well equipped. One of my heroes, Jonathan Kuzo, in his numerous work, articulated the plight of urban schools. And those are the type of things that we are focused on in the cultural responsive teaching. To raise the awareness of the environment from where the students are coming from, because there's incongruency between what the school may want these kids to do and what the students actually do. So the teachers are to understand these differences and figure ways to bridge those gaps. It could mean that some teachers may be over doubling their work, as most of them do, in order to bring those kids to speed to where they're supposed to be, because of some of the things that had gone over their development time. There was an article I wrote that I put in the LinkedIn that looked into achievement gap, and that attracted so many people that I couldn't even imagine, because it really underscores the importance of meeting students where they are, using what I consider as consumer orientation model. That is, you get to produce things that will support the consumers, just like products manufacturers do, instead of packaging curriculum and sending to kids who may not even have any connection to that, because it makes it very difficult. But if you approach it through my model, where you begin to utilize where students are, utilize things that they are familiar with to develop curriculum that could be linked to higher learning you want them to do, to be engaged in, you will ultimately succeed. Now, coming to administrative part, whether we believe it or not, there are still discriminatory practices in our schools. And sometimes what I advocate for leaders is to develop a framework, develop open association with all, so that you can get real information as to what happens, not to punish them or take somebody's job away, but to figure a way to inform, to educate, because as I said, I still believe that human beings are by nature good. If someone is not seeing the blind spot, or what some may characterize as unconscious mind or conscious things that are happening, schemata that had developed about how they perceive other people cannot be divorced from how they react to such individuals. I'd argued elsewhere that if you look at teachers who, when they come, they are criticized for treating certain students differently. Well, if you really investigate it, you find out that those who do that don't intentionally do it. It's just because they are not aware of those things. And cultural responsive practices will raise the awareness of people, whether that in administrative division or in teaching division. I read an article where a faculty member, or what not a faculty member, is a teacher in a primary school, was walking around in a predominantly white school, and 4 or 5 guys were making disparaging comments about the teacher. Well, the teacher went to tell the administrative leader, which happened to be the principal. The principal was like, don't worry about it. It was cavalierly dealt with. And I'm like, where is the leadership? This is an opportunity not to punish those who had not known any better, but to create a forum for learning so that those type of things, do not happen again, and that they could build on that to look at other problems that may emerge somewhere else and ultimately educate those kids to know better. So those are some of the things I'm doing. And I also utilize diversity conference, which I had done for a number of years. Every year when I was doing it for the college here, I had conference where I invited different people, whether it's on gender or equity-related issues or jobs, and how all those things are connected. Sometimes some people deal with them as if they're separate things. They are interwoven, they're connected. And if you look at one and don't look at the other, whatever you do may not occur. And that's why I utilize the term systemic approach to diversity and inclusion. If you use systemic approach, it will be across the board with assessment mechanism, not to punish, but to figure out what can we do better. And together we could elevate the civility and cultural understanding of one another and benefit from it as a school, as a community, as a state, in fact, as our global community.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that work and the humane approach that you're taking to individuals who are exhibiting these difficult biases and trying to educate them, changing them through the exposure and your workshops too. And I understand that you have a new book that will be coming out at some point in the not too distant future, correct?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I think the book, essentially, I consider that something I really have to do. It looks into our belief formation process, looks into why do people behave the way they behave. And I use it to frame the discussion on a number of issues. Say, for instance, when we talk about racism, racism is something we construct, it's human construction. Sexism, inequity, whether it's gender or whatever nature or form it comes, they're all, I believe, as a result of that. In fact, there was a part of it where one of my friends was saying, wow, I essentially tried to say, well, when we look at cultural relative, and we all know what relative terms are, especially those in academia, and then we look at the fact that children in this society are acculturated into believing in Santa Claus. And Santa Claus is always something joyful about Christmas and what it does. Well, any kid that grows up here pretty much knows about Santa Claus. And I started thinking, if Santa Claus, we believe in Santa Claus because it's culturally woven into our thinking by our parents, by all kinds of things. Then as we went further, I tried to say that as we grow up, we begin to see that Santa Claus actually doesn't get us anything. Perhaps you may look at it some other ways to make sure that what we're saying is consistent with facts. If Santa Claus doesn't get us anything, maybe kids may begin to ask the question, Mom and Dad, why did you lie to me all these years? Why did you have to lie to me? Santa Claus never got me anything. Well, the fact is that we ingrain that in the minds of kids, even adults have grown to believe it. Then I kind of try to look at how about other societies, that other societies may have abhorred behavior, such as something like caste system. I'm like, caste system, and that is still exists in our world? It's perplexing. Then I look at child marriage that is still existing here. Then I look at the culture. Now I come to the point where I continue to argue that it's wrong, but we have to begin to really question the cultural things that tend to ingrain this kind of belief system and begin to challenge these cultures.
I would agree, absolutely. Do you have a website where people can go to look at your work and your thoughts?
Well, I do have a website. It's diversityfrontier.com, www.diversityfrontier.com. That's where my website is.
Okay.
Really, yeah.
Well, I'm sure that our audience will be looking at that website, looking to see what you write, and when your book comes out, looking for that too. And I'm sure that they will get a great deal out of it, as we have from this podcast alone. So I'm looking forward to hearing more on these very timely topics from you. And I thank you so much for sharing this with us today. And audience, thank you for tuning in once again. And we will be back with more podcasts, and hopefully with some articles from Joseph to follow up on his wonderful vision. Thank you, Joseph, again.
Thank you so much, Deborah.
Pleasure.